So welcome everybody. We should be live now. Welcome to this evening or early evening's webinar. The Smart Recovery Australia will be running for you all. I can see there was high volume registrations that even if they don't make it tonight, everyone will be emailed a video of the webinar immediately after we've finished. So before I guess we just get started, I just want to mention that there is a chat box function there that I can see that Stephen has already commented on. Hi, Stephen. And there is a question box as well. So what I'd like throughout the day, you can chat to each other if you wish. Also, if you wanted to field questions, we will have questions at the end. So that you can click on those questions, field your questions, and we will discuss them at the end. I seem to have lost video of Monica, but I'll carry on at the moment. So the session tonight is going to be motivational interviewing as a brief intervention. And we've been very fortunate to have Dr. Monica Moore with us today. She seems like she's having some video issues, but we'll try her again in a little second.
Okay.
So Dr. Moore is a GP with a full-time psychotherapy practice in New South Wales, and she graduated in medicine over 25, 26 years ago, I think. And in 2000, to therapy. She has a passion for CBT and motivational interviewing, and is also delivers training to a number of health professionals in the field across a range of modalities, which one is motivational interviewing, which is the topic for today. So we're really to have, or would you prefer Monica?
Fine, whatever you want to call me, that's fine.
We'll go with Monica. So thank you, Monica, for joining us today. Currently we have 47 online, and as I say, there'll be more hopefully joining us. So again, what we'll do is we have a number of questions that we're going to work through, and Monica's a few slides to work through. Please field your questions in the questions section that's on the right-hand side. It's next to the chat box function. And any questions, we'll try and have time to field them at the end. So please do that. I won't be able to always follow the chat box throughout the whole time. So please field the questions specifically to Monica or myself at the end on the question section. I guess just a brief couple of minutes about myself. So my name is Dan. I'm one of the national program managers at Smart Recovery Australia, as well, one of three. And I felt we were running these topic webinars. We've been running the topic ones for the last 6 months or so, and they seem to be very well received. We were trying to pick topics and also get some insights from people, facilitators of Smart Recovery, around what topics they would like as well. So we want to make sure that we are delivering topics that are relevant and helpful for you as facilitators to continue the fantastic work we do at Smart Recovery. One being for myself, I felt around motivational interviewing is really key. I think for my experience, the fundamental spirit of smart recovery, perhaps maybe a little bit different than I have been used to implementing it into a group setting compared to maybe one-to-one. But nevertheless, I feel that it's what underpins everything we do in Smart. The tools and all the other strategies and things are great, but if we can understand the spirit of and the philosophy of motivational interviewing, and kind of just wear it as just a cloak that we do every day in any interactions or in the work that we do one-to-one or in the groups, I feel it's a real key foundation for everything we do at Smart. So first of all, welcome Monica again, and we're really thankful to have you on board tonight's webinar. I'm going to try and just flick through some of these slides here. We should have that one up over there. And so we have a number of questions. We felt that the webinar tonight, we've got about 4 or 5 questions that are fielding to Monica, and she's tailored her slides around these to try and answer these. I'm sure she'll have much more insight into expanding those questions. And again, we'll field some questions for you, for everyone that's attending tonight as well. So Smart Recovery is a 4-point program, as we know. Number 1, building and maintaining motivation. Number 2, coping with urges and cravings. Number 3, problem solving. And number 4, lifestyle balance. And the first and probably most fundamental for me and for Smart is being building and maintaining motivation, because that's not just at the beginning, it's all throughout someone's journey. So I guess the question, Monica, to pose to you, why is this so important to always be mindful of when working with participants, regardless of the stage of change?
Look, I think, you mentioned sort of earlier on the spirit of motivational interviewing, and the whole idea that essentially the person with the problem is the one who's going to have the solution. And so Miller and Rolnick were 2 clinicians who were working with people who had a particular alcohol problem. That was the addiction clinic that they were working in. And they wanted to find a different way of working with people that wasn't just about beating them over the head with what they should do, because that wasn't working so well. And so one of the things that really underpins motivational interviewing is that what you're trying to do is help that person connect to their own motivation and commitment for change. And so it's really a conversation. It's like learning another language, because what you really are is curious about that person in front of you, and you're curious about what is important for them, and therefore what is important for them that's going to give them the energy towards change. And very much recognising that autonomy is the key ingredient in anyone's decision making, that it's because they want to do it for their own reasons, not because we think it's a good thing for them to do. And my background is a GP, we're trained to do that.
Mm-hmm. They tend to not get very good response at being told what to do.
That's right.
My wife tries very much, so she tries, and she's probably successful for most of
the
time.
No one likes to be told.
But I find what you said, in Smart, the key is that intrinsic motivation. We can have extrinsic motivation that drives us in some capacity, and these seems to be the catalyst sometimes for bringing us into these environments. But for me, it's that intrinsic motivation, tapping into that really starts that spark, a journey for that person, and it keeps that moving forward. And in Smart, because it's mutual aid, it's the peers as well, that sit in a very important space, because as the facilitators are not the experts, and we make that very clear, that the peers can be received a little bit easier when they are offering some insights and suggestions. So yeah, that's very interesting, Martha.
Yeah. And I think you make a point of, there's intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and some people really respond to that being accountable to others, you know what I mean? So they're going to change because their child has been commenting on whatever habit it is that, and they sort of say, oh, gee, I don't want to be a bad example for my children. And some people, it's very much the intrinsic motivation. It's because it doesn't fit with my identity, the way I see myself in the world. And so we're so different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is it's the values and the core hierarchy of needs for that individual, and sometimes we prioritize them even subconsciously, or we prioritize them just through necessity at that moment in time, and they're not really how we want life to be. But yet, a substance or behaviour can take over that and become the main priority. But it's really hooking us away from those values that we want out of life. And I think when you're in Smart or you're in these settings, and if the facilitator is using motivational interviewing through that conversation and that collaborative nature, it taps into that discord or that discrepancy that's displaying itself from there's the values and the way I want to be, and this is what's happening now.
Yeah, and Dan, I was hearing to you speak earlier about we don't like to be told what to do, and when I learnt motivational interviewing, it wasn't just good for work, but it really helped me in my relationships as well. And I was thinking, when one you know, when a husband or a wife wants the other one to do something, okay, and how you conduct that conversation. And so, you know, in your own, you know, when you're saying, you know, my wife tells me what to do, sometimes that doesn't work. And when you're thinking about your own motivation as to why you might say yes to that request, that's one of the things that, you know, when we're working with people, we're wanting to help them to do that, to explore their own motivation, and also not just their own motivation, but that sense of, do they have the confidence? Do they feel competent? Do they, you know, do they have some unhelpful beliefs about themselves that it's too hard and that they can't do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we find, what I'm encouraging people in the training, that people will be in a different stage of change about different behaviours, and they could be pre-contemplative, they could be in action, it could be maintenance, and they're balancing all these different behaviours in these different stages. And what can happen sometimes is there may be extrinsic motivation, like probation or parole, told someone to come here, and they're in that stage of pre-contemplative denial, you know, I don't want to change. Yet as we work with them in that spirit of MI, we're really not focusing on that specific behaviour. We start to unpack the other impacts it's having and other things that people want to change, and they tend to end up finding those connections themselves anyway when we don't go straight in for that, because you end up finding some conflict there and end up butting heads with someone where they're there and you're down here. And
it's interesting that what you say about, you know, pre-contemplation, contemplation. When Miller and Rolnick wrote their first work, you know, they talked about, they used Prochaska and all's work that reflected the stages of change, you know, that some people were just not ready to change, that just wasn't the right time. And so talking to them about change just created this sort of reaction. And that people sometimes were contemplating, they were sitting on the fence, they're still not quite sure whether they're going to do it or not, and that our conversation with them can sometimes create that connection so that they could do so, they could change and make things better. And that other people would just come in and they were just ready, and we're just helping them along and supporting them and being their fan club. But I remember going to one of Bill Miller's workshops in Melbourne, the last one, and he made the point that someone can shift from contemplation to pre-contemplation within the session when you're talking with them, if in some way, you know, the conversation goes a bit pear-shaped. And so it's not a set and fixed thing, and that we can't sort of go, okay, so this person's pre-contemplation, so I'll do X, Y, Z. That it's more a sort of a fluid conversation. We're just interested in the person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, and something that's just come to mind now, and I don't know if anyone's an avid fan of kung fu movies, but the great kung fu master and possible philosopher Bruce Lee, he said, "Be like water," you know, because water will change to any shape, you know, at once, and be that fluid kind of movement. And I think that's what I find is that collaborative approach. You know, it's that you've got to be flexible, and when you do that, they start working with you as well. Right. And they find that place that's comfortable for them, but not too comfortable, because if we're too comfortable, we'll never change. But it is that collaborative, work with me kind of energy and conversation that flows like that.
Although also sometimes, you know, when you say not too comfortable, it depends on the person. Because sometimes it's that letting go and that decrease in pressure that allows the person, it's a really interesting thing, change, okay? There are some people, a small percentage of the population, that if the pressure is on, if the discomfort is on for them to change, it makes it much harder for them. That change for them is much easier when they actually, when the pressure is off and when they go, I have freedom. I have freedom to do whatever I want. And within that spectrum of doing whatever I want, then they go, I can do this or I can do that. And then they can connect to their identity and they've got the freedom to be whatever they want. Have you heard of the work of Gretchen Rubin?
No, I'm not familiar.
Okay, so this is a sideways sort of thing, which is not motivational interviewing, but I find it fascinating because it's got so much overlap. So Gretchen Rubin is a writer. She's not a psychologist or a social worker or in any way qualified in this field. She's a lawyer. But what she's noticed is that there are, we have a particular combination of ways of responding to both inner and outer expectations. So an outer expectation is the example I want to set for my children, or, you know, the fact that the coach expects me to turn up for practice, and so I'm going to turn up for practice. And an inner expectation is, I want to get up every morning and go for a run, or, you know, I've decided to go to the gym 3 times a week. And so the really interesting thing is that she worked out that within a population, there's a very constant, it's like being left-handed or right-handed. There's a very constant combination of how easy you find it to respond to these inner and outer expectations. And so there's a certain percentage of the population that just say, this is what I'm going to do tomorrow, and then off they go and they do it. And there are others who will, they will need an outer expectation. They'll need to belong to a coach. So the whole premise of things like Weight Watchers and, you know, those fun runs that people do for charity. And so because they're doing it for charity, they get motivated to go and train and to do everything. But once that cause is over, they find it very difficult to continue their training. And it's about 44% of the population will actually fit that mold of they'll do it because someone expects them to, or they feel that someone expects them to, and so they'll just do that. The rest of the population, in fact, is different, and there's a small percentage of the population that if you expect them to do something, they will get this reaction to it, and they will find it very difficult to do so. So that's why motivational interviewing is so good, because it allows you to explore with that person, when have you been able to change things before? How did you do that? Yeah. That's the conversation.
And what we find and we encourage in the training, so let's say you have someone coming into this group setting with this preconceived idea that maybe probation or someone's told them they have to get off drugs, and that's what they come for, or at least they're kind of coerced to come for. But they leave with a little plan that's nothing to do necessarily with getting off drugs, you know, because it's about, as I say, working with that fluidity and finding something that's key to them that ends up linking to them getting to that place of being potential to deal with that behavior. But they're just working on something so small. And when I say in training, I say using the confidence rating scale. And you ask someone, you know, and they want to get off alcohol or something, and they say, I really want to get off alcohol. And they say, well, how confident are you? And they say 4 or 5 out of 10. And I'm like, well, don't you want to find a plan today that's 7 or 8? So let's change that plan slightly. That could be the goal, but you may have small plans in the midst of that, like contacting a friend as a support person. Well, that's more than a 5 out of 10. I can do that. That's a 9 out of 10. So really, the plan is just that you're going to make that phone call, not the overall goal, and that becomes more achievable rather than hammering this 40 to 50% chance of success.
Yeah.
When you just
can I just get you to change to the next slide? Because
absolutely.
Yeah, because one of the things I think that that really sort of that Bill Miller was talking about was the fact that when people say something, they're either giving you facts and information like, this is how much I smoke or how much I drink or whatever, or they're giving you sort of things that indicate that they want to change. I need to do it. I want to do it. This is the reason for me to do it. I can do it. I've done it before. So all of these are sort of things that we want to continue. Like it's like a little coal that's flaming, and we want to ask more about that. We want to be really curious about that. But there's also this thing called sustained talk. And sometimes when we give a plan to someone who is not yet quite ready, they will go, yes, but. And I'm sure you've had that happen, yes? Yeah. Okay. And so sustained talk is like anything that the person says, which is about staying the same. And the thing about it is that, as I say in my next slide, which we don't have to look at yet, but the instinct that we have is to say, no, don't go that way. Come over here, come towards the positive change again. And if we argue with someone when they're going that yes, but thing, and we go yes, but back, essentially what we're doing is that then we're giving them the change talk, and so then they have to stay with the sustain talk. It's a really funny dance. And so the best thing that we can do when someone goes, sorry?
This one here. Is this the slide that you wanted here?
The one, yes, because that's the change talk.
Yeah.
Okay, so the change talk is when people speak of the desire. I want to, I can. These are the reasons. The blood test came back this way. This is why I need to do it. And sometimes they'll say, I'm really committed to do it. I've enrolled in the gym. I've, got rid of all my cigarettes. I didn't bring any wine home today when I shopped. If their, activation can be that they've, told people about it. This is what I'm going to do. They're taking steps. I didn't put any soft drink in my trolley this week. So all of those things are the things that you want to be asking more about. Okay. And then if you just go on to the next slide, okay, which essentially talks about the sort of thing that happens when we want more change talk. We say, can you tell me more about that? What makes it important for you? And if they say yes, but, and you can go, now, does anybody watch Inspector Columbo? See, I'm actually older than what you had me. I've been doing medicine for much longer than what you said, but never mind. So I don't know whether any of you have ever watched Inspector Columbo or know of him, but he was a bumbling inspector, and he would go around and he would have conversations with the murderer, but in such a way that you really thought, he and the murderer were looking at the problem together. He wasn't blaming the murderer. He wasn't, contemptuous. He wasn't angry. He didn't do. It was just, we're just looking at this problem together. Can you help me to understand it? I notice, and he would always put the negative first, the sustain talk first. I noticed that you said that, you were just unsure about this, but on the other hand, you said you really wanted to become a non-drinker by the end of the year. Tell me more about that. And when people would have the sustain talk, you'd go, that doesn't make sense. You just told me you really want to, stop smoking so that you can mind your grandchildren. I'm putting words in his mouth. He clearly wasn't saying things like that. He was saying things about the murder. But if you just go onto YouTube and watch Columbo, he's doing motivational interviewing. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I watched it in the 80s when I was growing up. I'd need to rewatch it now, knowing a lot more about motivational interviewing. Just watch it for that.
Yeah.
So, so what I say as well, and I'll probably use the Columbo reference from there on. Thank you, Marika, and the training, because I see it as this, and I say it to people in the training. Imagine you're just going to stand at the top of a mountain with someone shoulder to shoulder, looking out at their kind of situation and trying to figure it out and trying to see some things that they don't notice and help them just, talk through it, rather than what I think we do on occasion when we're in counselling, or what we hopefully talk not to do, is just sit in this intense one-on-one dialogue, this interviewing, because that's where I guess the word interviewing maybe confuses a little bit, because we think it's an interrogation and an exploration like maybe some of the other police shows that we've seen. But I see it as standing shoulder to shoulder, on the same level, just having a look out. What do you make of this? Because what you're saying this and what they're saying, it doesn't quite match up. How do you think that plays out in your situation? And what does that mean to you when you see that, kind of discrepancy there, or the contradictions you just shared with us, and exploring with them like that?
That's right. And that thing, in my previous slide, when we talked about, actually, I don't know, it's your previous slide, mine is slightly different order to yours. Can you just click after it might actually be the next one.
dealing with?
Yeah, okay, because I wanted to talk a little bit about discord. Because, when you get someone, you think you're sailing along really well, and then you get a reaction. Yeah?
Mm.
And so
Mm-hmm. Yep.
you've experienced this.
Yeah, I mean, you think things are going great, and you're like, yeah, this is going awesome. Then all of a sudden, you're thrown a curveball, and you're like,
what happened? What actually happened? Yeah. Okay. And so I think it's really important to know that even, and Bill Miller said this, and he, put this stuff together and is really good at it. And he says, whenever I lose my way and whenever I try and tell people what to do, or I'm not listening, and what happens is that you get discord, you get someone having a reaction. Now, that reaction doesn't have to be, irritability, although it can be. That reaction can just be a glazing of the eyes, a sort of looking off into the distance, or kind of like someone going, yep, but they're just not engaged.
Yeah, like my 4-year-old boy. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it. And so the acronym OARS, okay, is very much sort of speaks to that way of dealing with it. It's essentially to have open questions, to be open about it and sort of say, oh, I wonder what happened. Are we on the same page? I've just noticed that something happened then. Can you tell me more about it? That's an open question. And then affirmations are where we sort of give something back to that person that we say, oh, we were working, I just felt we were working together quite well before this. And I was finding out more about you and about how you're feeling about these issues. And, you might say we were working really hard, or I know, I've worked with you before and I know how committed you are. Whatever it is that we've noticed about that person, it's like salt, you know what I mean? Like not too much. And a reflection might just be a reflection of perhaps their emotions, because sometimes we say, gee, I notice you're just a little bit disconnected, or I notice, you got a little bit irritated with me. I wonder what that's about. And then summarizing is something that you might, kind of go, so I think this is what's happening. And the interesting thing is that when we're using it in a group setting, okay, we can even sort of acknowledge it and apologize and then say to the group, excuse me, group, can you help me? What did anybody notice? What do you think would be helpful over here? Because often the group have noticed before the facilitator has, especially in that sense that you can't pay attention to everything all the time. And it might not be something you did or said. It might be something someone else in the group did or said, or that happened outside.
Mm-hmm.
And,
absolutely.
And that person might say, no, I don't want to talk about it in the moment. And that's perfectly fine. You say, of course, not a problem. And, I was thinking about, I watched Kathy Kesselman's, is it Kesselman's her name? Talking about trauma-informed care. And she was saying that sometimes people have reactions in a meeting. And you can say, is it all right if we just take a little break and would you like to go for a walk? Are you okay? Come and get a drink of water. Would you like to come back into the meeting? Because sometimes we just need to take time out. And maybe it's not something that, we pushed a bit or created, sort of told people what to do when they weren't ready, or gave them a plan when they weren't ready. That those are the times when someone is going to come up, or gave them a plan that's not, an idea that's not consistent with their values. And we might have no idea that was what was going to happen, but that's, we're learning all the time, and that's okay. It's all right to make mistakes. It's all right to sort of acknowledge it, and then to ask, how can I best help you? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's key, and I think that should really take a lot of pressure off us, because, we train facilitators for 2 days, and I keep hammering it to them. I say, look, you're not going to be a polished facilitator. You're not going to be polished in MI and all these kind of things, but you've got to work this and become more confident, and be open and honest with the group. And if you make mistakes, just apologize and be honest. You know, I've actually probably led us down in a situation or the conversation, and you know, let's kind of backtrack. But what you said earlier on, I think that around, you know, acceptance, commitment, or that kind of mindfulness in these group settings is really key as well. As you say, you can't just concentrate on everything, but when you notice stuff, just put a little pause on it and open that up and say, what's happening here? What are we experiencing? What kind of thoughts and feelings and sensations around this atmosphere in this group? What's going on? What's changed? You know, and it's really for me, it's taking control over perhaps a cycle that we have no control over sometimes. You know, especially through addictive behaviour, where we're functioning on this kind of cycle that we always don't control. We just need to stop and pause and breathe and be mindful of what's going on.
That's right. Yeah. And the basic idea is that motivational interviewing is not about creating, like, everybody converting immediately that meeting, you know, right there, right then. You haven't. No one's failed. It's not a dark mark against anyone. Motivational interviewing is more about having a conversation where there's a space where you can actually allow that change to occur, and where people are allowed to really explore for themselves what their inner motivation is. And just to use an example, because I think sometimes stories are helpful. As a GP, I used to have a young man who would come in, and he was an apprentice, so he was younger than 18, right? And he would come in, and he would always have the results of a fight, a drunken brawl on a Monday morning. And so I would, you know, write out an X-ray scan request, or I would be stitching him up, or I would be examining something, or whatever. Okay. And each time I would say, does it bother you that, you know, no. Does it bother you how much you drink? No, not at all. Does it bother you that you get hurt? No, I'm just, you know, protecting my mates. It's really important that we stand together, you know, that if someone's picking on one of my mates, I go in there and fight. I mean, he was short, but he was a very, very delicate, dainty human being, but he would go in there and get beaten up. So eventually, as we were having these conversations, each time, because I'm a GP and I could see him every week because he presented every week, I found out that he really enjoyed surfing. Surfing was his passion. He was saving up to go to Hawaii. And so I do remember that I was stitching up his face one day, his eyebrow. And so as a GP, you know, the person's lying down and you have a piece of sterile paper over their face to keep everything clean. And I was just, you know, I had a little hole here so I could work on his eyebrow and do a neat job. And I was saying to him, oh, Hawaii, isn't that part of the United States? And don't the United States get really sort of quite particular about visas, and they don't really, you know, anyone who's even got like a hint of police problems, like the police have arrested you for drunken behavior but not necessarily charged you, you know, sometimes you can't get a visa to Hawaii. Anyway, it went really quiet underneath the sheet, and I thought, oh, the poor man, he's passed out. But then I said, are you okay in there? And he said, yeah, I'm fine. But he was really quiet. And then I didn't see him anymore on a Monday morning.
Yeah.
He no longer came. But because I'm a GP, his mother accosted me in the corridor and said, what did you do? And I said, what do you mean what I do? My son isn't getting into fights anymore. How did you do that? I've been at him for years. And that's because he had connected with his own motivation. So that's why when we're really interested in whether someone, and that's sort of their strengths and their resources as well. You know, someone who says, I can't get a job and I can't do anything, and, you know, I can just sort of exist as a, you know, not having any achievements. But when I sort of got to know that person, they ran an online community with a special interest, and they did it beautifully. And the more I got them to talk about this online community and their great organizational skills and tell me more about that and tell me more about that. And then, you know what I mean? That connected them with their strength and their resources as to how they could get out of the situation that they were in. So that's That's the beauty of motivational interviewing. Does that make sense?
And so I was just, yeah, absolutely, that's great. I was just looking at some of the other questions, and you're touching on some of it at the moment. That you train motivational interviewing training for GPs, and I would imagine these GP appointments are getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
But it's probably not too dissimilar than the amount of time that we have with participants in the group. So the national average at SMART is about 6 across Australia. It can be less, it can be a lot more. But the stats show an average of 6 people, in the facility. And with 90 minutes and with the structure that we function on, you may only have about 10 minutes of conversation with someone. So I guess, how can you best kind of use motivational interviewing, I guess, when you've got such a brief moment with them? And you've exampled some of that. It was just, a couple of minutes conversation, wasn't it?
Yeah. Bill Miller would say that if you've even just got like a corridor consultation, like because Stephen Rolnick is a doctor, he would say, look, what do you think would work for you? And sometimes that opens up the conversation. And if they say, I don't know, and you can say, either what would you advise a good friend? Or I know you say you don't know, but if you did know, what would that be?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can phrase it like when I learned motivation interviewing, I found it easier to just use the guidelines like, the Dunn Cats, the desire, the ability, the reasons and the needs. And I would phrase questions around it. So said, look, can I just ask you some questions about, your alcohol? And can I just say, is there a part of you that wants to give up? So recognizing there's a part of them that doesn't, but I want to talk to the part of you that wants to give up. Is there a part of you that wants to give up? And have you done difficult things in the past? Do you think you might be able to? Even if you decide not to do it, do you think you might be able to? So what might be 3 good reasons for you to give up? And why, can you tell me about what some of the things might be that you could do if you decided to give up? And sometimes just answering those questions and being curious about it gets that part of the brain active, puts it on the back burner, they can think about it, and you just leave it. You don't press them, but you just leave it.
Because you don't know what's going on in someone's head, and I think as clinicians, as facilitators, we want to see outcomes, and we want to see things changing and happening in front of us, and we don't always get that privilege. We've got to just trust that people are leaving with something. And I say that if people can walk away with one little bit of an awareness that they didn't have before they come into that group, then we have done our job, and let them work with that. And I think what you touched on there, the beauty of having a mutual aid group, is that you may have someone that's not in that change headspace, but if you've got someone over here who's working some things out, you can ask that individual who's really not in that to give them advice, and that gets the brain ticking, even though we're not talking about you, but they'll walk away because I've just given that person advice to do that. Why am I not doing it myself? And it starts that ball rolling for them. I mean, that's probably similar to what you just touched on, isn't it, Monica?
Very much so, very much so. And the other thing about the group thing is that, as a GP, like I was thinking about this presentation, I know you work in groups, and, GPs, we don't work in groups. But there are 2 things that were sort of single incident interventions and were not just like, I wasn't sort of passionate about it, but like, in other words, like there were just sort of throwaway comments on my part. But one was a woman who came in with a headache, and she was, I talked to her about her blood pressure was a bit high, and she was someone who said, yes, but I'm too busy to do anything about it. And then when I said, okay, these are the problems if your blood pressure isn't treated, so come back and, get it checked again. What are the problems? Well, if you don't treat blood pressure, you could have a stroke or a heart attack. And that's when she sort of changed colour a little bit, a stroke. And I said, yes. And then I didn't see her for 6 months. And she came back and she was a different woman. She said, "You don't recognize me." And I said, "No, that's right. I don't recognize you." She says, "Well, I really took what you said on board. I started exercising. I'm eating right. My blood pressure's normal and I don't want to have a stroke." And I said, "Could you remind me, please? Because I see lots of people." And then she told me that because her mother had had a stroke, and this is unbeknownst to me, her mother had had a stroke and she didn't want to have a stroke herself. That was her inner motivation. So it's sometimes when you just give people information, but in a really non-judgmental way. And I think that, there are lots of examples of where you might just, I notice here in the chat box, we sow the seed and someone else can water it or another situation can water it. And you only need, if you have a container with water in it, okay, using a water metaphor again, all right, if you have a container with water and you have a little crack, eventually the water that's in there will seep out. Eventually that crack will widen. And so all we need to do is to create a little crack. That's all we need to do. That's our job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. That's great, Monica. So I'm just looking at the slides and things. So getting practical then, and I think I know what the answer is. But we do these 2 days training, and really the morning's a little bit of theory around SCBT, some of the principles. Then we get just really into the role playing on day 2. And for me, that's where people learn the most: seeing, practicing, going over and over and over again. What would you advise around beyond that? How you go about practicing some of the skills so that it really gets people quite fluid in what they're doing and becomes something that is just the way of being with people rather than a theory or technique that I'm going to try. How do you develop those skills more appropriately?
So I must admit, for myself, okay, I mean, everybody's different, okay, but I had a little piece of paper with the questions on my desk in front of me, and that they're not, sort of, because it's like a language, it improves with practice. And so I just got like the questions around desire and ability and reason and need. I just formulated some questions, and I picked people that I thought weren't going to be too difficult for me, like we didn't have clashes of personality or whatever. And so, and I just practiced it. I just practiced asking them the questions and being really interested. I practiced asking them, a scale of 0 to 100, how confident do you feel you are? And then if they give me a number, I'd ask, so what do you, what do you think makes it a 5 and not a 2? And the reason why I would ask it that way, because as Bill Miller pointed out, if I say, what makes it a 5 and not a 2? Well, they're giving me change talk because they're saying why it's a 5 and not a 2. If I ask them why it's a 5 and not a 9, they're going to give me sustained talk. And I don't want sustained talk. I want to decrease, I want to validate that and say that must feel awful, that you're so busy, so overwhelmed, that it's so difficult. And can I just ask you about, that reason that you gave me that you wanted to change, sort of bring the conversation back to that. So I practiced on easy people. I had a piece of paper because that's the way I learn languages. And the other thing is I practiced on my family. So my children got motivationally interviewed. My husband got motivationally interviewed. My friends, as a GP, I get trained to tell people to do things. And can I just say, it really improved my relationships with friends when I stopped telling them what to do. And I would just be curious and ask them what they wanted to do and what would be easier, what would work for them. How could they make it? Yeah, so that's the thing about practice. Don't think that you just have to practice in the groups. Practice everywhere you go. Strike up a conversation with someone on the train.
Absolutely. And I think, what I encourage people, I just think from a sporting perspective, you don't practice, like let's say boxers or athletes, you don't practice on the field. You know, you go home, you live a lifestyle, you practice, you eat healthy, you break down all your training and all the things, so it's just so clunky and messy, and just give it a go, and your trainer just pulls you apart, push you back together again, and when you're on the field or in that boxing ring, it's on, it's reflex, you know. And I've always said that, and I sat down with my wife, I said, quite a number of months ago, just for a coffee, planning the week, and she turned around to me and says, "Is this what you do at Smart Recovery?" And I was like, you know what? It's just become something that's I'm so used to doing now. Now I don't do it all the time. Trust me. I had a bit of a conversation with my wife last night that didn't go as well. You need to use my motivational interviewing skill. But I think we want people to practice it so much in the training ground, so that when they go into the ring or the field, it's a muscle memory, it's a reflex. And that's the very thing we're trying to help the people we're helping do, to self-manage and stop being in this automatic cycle, that they can just pause, stop, plan, think about it, and do it over and over again, so that it becomes a reflex, it becomes muscle memory, and they rather react in this positive mindset and rather than a maladaptive cycle that they're stuck in.
Yeah, and there are videos also on the internet. You know, if you go to the Motivational Interviewing website, you can see lots of people doing it in lots of different ways. And sometimes you'll listen to someone conducting motivational interviewing in session and kind of go, oh, I could really, you know, that's my language. That's something that I would, you know, that would sort of fit really easily with me. Rather than asking questions, I just, you know, put these statements out and then get that person to sort of resonate with them. And one of the things about reflections, like, you know, when someone says something, is reflecting their emotions. And that helps the person to feel really understood. So watching other people do this makes it easier. You kind of go, oh, that's how they do it. Oh, okay. You know, that's how you know, that's the language around it that I'll use it. That's the body language. That's the posture. So there's so many things we can learn from watching people who are very good at it do it. And again, practice. I run a workshop, a one-day workshop once a year. The next one that I'm going to do is in September, and that's exactly what I do. You know, I get people to sit down to learn the concept of motivational interviewing, but they listen to a podcast beforehand, so that when we are in the session, we can just be practicing on each other, watching other people do it, you know, getting better at it just simply by doing it for the 6 hours that we're together. It really is about practicing it.
Absolutely, and I love the idea. I've not probably used it as much as myself, is that learning a new language, you know. And you know, I'm probably, some people may think my Scottish accent, I'm still learning the English language, but you know, when you're trying to learn something new, you know, it's clunky. You know, when I've been in Europe or something and I'm trying to explain things in French or whatever, it's just messy, you know. But the more you do it, the more you use it, the more it just becomes fluent. And it's like anything, you know, like any muscle that you work or any effort you put into it, it just becomes second nature. So I totally agree. You know, use it with the grocery, the guy delivering your groceries, or use it at you know, at dinner with your friends, or any situation you find yourself in. Have a few questions in your arsenal that just come to mind, that create that space for people to explore and think about it, you know, and raise a bit of awareness, a bit of curious questioning to themselves. You know? Monica, there is a couple of questions there, and if you've got anything else to share, you know, feel free before we can do that.
No, I'd love to sort of answer questions. That'd be great.
Sure. So we've only got a couple. If anyone else has got another question for Monica, please put it into the question section now, because we will just work through a couple of these before we've got 10 minutes left. So Stephen Milne, who's actually down in Grafton, I've met Stephen. He's one of our peers workers there, so he's doing a great job. Probably not too dissimilar to what we said, but how do you work this into the meeting when there's 6 or more people? I guess the ORS, principles, when you've got multiple people in the room. We touched on some of it before, I think, though.
Yeah, I think that that the thing about working within the group, okay, is perhaps even sort of putting the question about, go inside and check with yourself, okay, would it be 3 good reasons for you to achieve the goals that you want to achieve by coming to this meeting? Because I know that in Smart Recovery, not everybody has the same, whatever it is that they're struggling with. The other things that might be helpful within a group is really, and I love the way you did that, that thing that you said about, asking one member to comment on someone else's, and that in family therapy, that's called circular questioning, where you ask, you have a family in the room with you, and you ask one family member to comment on the interactions of 2 other family members, and then you get such clarity from that. And it's really good ideas that it's, someone who is observing, they're likely to be coming from a calmer space than someone who is actually experiencing. And so that's why groups can be really wonderful as well, to sort of get the knowledge of the group, or even asking, does anybody have any ideas of, what they've heard that has helped someone else in a similar situation? These things that it depends on the group, and it depends on where it is that they're, the particular member, what they're talking about. Sometimes a particular member, what they'll be offering to the group is sustained talk. They'll be doing lots of yes buts, or my life is so difficult, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And occasionally that will sort of generate solutions. And as a group leader, I think one of the lovely things we can do is to say, I'm just going to pause the conversation, because can I just take a moment to say, to the person who is going through a difficult time, I think it's really important to validate that this is a really difficult time for you, and that it's, I can hear how overwhelmed you feel, or I can hear, and you might reflect back what that particular emotional sort of reaction is. Because if you don't do that, that person then feels unheard, unlistened to, and that, why bother coming back to the group?
Absolutely.
So that's sometimes,
yeah, absolutely.
Sorry?
Expressing empathy needs to be something that you just give off, I guess, just in the way that you communicate, that that sounds hard, but I can't imagine how difficult that must be for you, and that's about connection, isn't it? And that's what ultimately, for me, everyone's craving in addictive behaviors is connection. If they have someone that understands, the barriers just start going boom, 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 boom.
That's right. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Well, another question, Deb Rose says, so our group meets in a disadvantaged department, a housing estate, lots of complex needs. Many of the goals for motivation are unrealistic, like I might get my kids back, or when this is probably never going to happen. How do we deal with the unrealistic motivating change?
And so one of the things I think that's really important is that I don't have the crystal ball, and so I don't know whether that person will ever get their kids back. Do you know what I mean? So I need to, from my position, it's a little bit like a GP in cancer. You know what I mean? I need to sort of always hold a hope, okay? And so my goal is to sort of go, what is going to help that person go in that direction? And so to say, so can we break it down into, like, because I find it's a little bit like a marathon, you know what I mean? And a marathon is like a really long way, but normally with marathons we train and we have like small, like, it's Monica, run between here and the next lamppost, and then walk between the next lamppost and the next, and then run. And then if I do that over and over, I'll get to the marathon. So can you just help me understand what would be the first small step for you? And then the ultimate goal is for you to get your kids back.
Yeah.
Like what are we talking about here? What is it that you want to be able to achieve? And that helps to clarify for them like the steps that they need to take. And it's much easier to do a small step and to feel that wonderful degree of success because they've succeeded at the small step. And once you've got that connection with your own success and your own resources and strengths, that might then help you to do the next step. So I find that, you know, it's like as a GP, people would go, oh, I want to lose, you know, half my body weight. And I'd go, look, okay, I'm not going to say anything about that, but can we just talk? Can we make it like a small thing that we could measure and come back to? Because then, at least then you know, it's going to be. You want some degree of success along the way. Can we work that way? Is that okay? And I'm not quite sure whether that answers the question, but the other thing about, you know, working in sort of areas where there's a high A score and, you know, adverse childhood events are common, there's lots of complex trauma, and so people are having lots of reactions in the room, is that understanding that when I've done some sort of work with highly traumatized people, not in a group setting, but I know this occurs, is that the leader takes it upon themselves to go, from time to time, we're going to be interrupting and we're going to be standing up and shaking, you know, a little bit and stamping our feet and throwing balls to each other and doing all sorts of things to bring us back into the present moment rather than in that fight or flight sort of situation that we might have been triggered into because of the conversation. Yeah, to continue to ground throughout the meeting. Yeah.
And like, I hope, Debbie, that gave some insight. And I think, you know, what Monica's saying, especially in smart recovery meetings, we meet every 7 days. So hopefully they'll come back in 7 days. If they're rating their confidence level at this moment in time is quite low, or they're in that, then pick something that they can do in that 7 days. It's going to build self-efficacy, because if you can start to turn that notch up, something that they can do 7, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, definitely, boom. They've done that, then they'll push their comfort zone out a little bit more and a little bit more. And just naturally through that process, they're going to present themselves in a way that gives them the best chance of getting their kids back. Because they're taking positive steps to make small changes in their life, and people notice that and take note of it. So the goal can be out here, but I need to, you know, this mountain might be over here, but I need to get my little shovel and just move one little shovel.
That's right.
Over here,
and actually,
you know, and concentrate on that.
I need to make an important point, because one of the things about people with complex trauma is that when you praise them for taking that step, they can get a reaction. And so sometimes it's important for us to hold our praise and to ask them, and how do you feel about that? To get them to sort of go, oh, not bad.
Yeah.
You go, okay, not bad.
Yeah.
Because if you praise them, because praise has been associated with manipulation, sometimes it can feel really awful.
Yeah.
And do you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of stuff to do with trauma-informed care, but but it's something that's, you know, whenever we're affirming someone, is to actually sort of say, how do you feel about that? And, you know, that speaks to your commitment, doesn't it? You know, I can see that it speaks to your ability to do that, rather than saying, oh, good on you, you know, go you. Or because sometimes that can actually create a reaction, a negative reaction of its own. It's a really complex thing. But we can get to know people. Yeah.
But I really like that, because the fact of it is, as well, when you're in a group setting, not only may it be unhelpful to praise one individual, but if the next person hasn't had a successful plan, he doesn't get the praise. And, you know, so I'm not all about this, whoop, whoop, everyone, come on. And when people start clapping in groups, and I'm like, no, please, no. And I like to reflect and just say, well, how have you felt it's gone? Like, how do you feel making that plan successful this week? Did you think you were able to do it? What does that mean then in regards to making a new plan, something a little bit more harder? Then, you know, they may be just building that up.
Yeah, what does it say about you as a person that you are able to do that? Get them to come up with the words.
Saying that you're a failure and you'll never do this, but yet you've just proven to yourself that you can't do it. And that's self-management, isn't it?
That's right.
Mm. Well,
Yeah.
look, I'm just
There's
mindful
a lot of good that you can
time,
do.
and there'll be people that are desperately trying to get their kids down and get fed, and they'll be expecting their loved ones home. So we will wrap up today. Please, if anyone wants to know a little bit more about Monica and the work she does, the website is available there. And I believe there is a podcast available on there as well, Monica, that I've listened to, which is great. But again, thank you so much for your insights today. I hope it's been really helpful. It's great just to chat with someone in this forum, and no, I don't like the comment Deb wrote about "Go Blues" at the end there. That was uncalled for. But, it was going so well up until that point, Deb. But thank you very much, Monica. And as I said, this webinar will be available as soon as as soon as we end this webinar. Everyone that's registered will get access to rewatch it. And again, thank you very much, Monica, and all the best.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to. And this is the first time when Dan contacted me. I'm a bit ashamed. It was the first time I'd heard of Smart Recovery, but since then I found out more about you guys, and I'm so glad that you are in the world doing the work that you do. Mm-hmm. But fantastic! Thank you so much, and good night.
Great, thank you very much, Monica, and thank you everyone for joining.
Okay, bye.
And we'll see you at the next webinar, I believe, is on acceptance and commitment therapy. So check the websites and the dates for that. Thank you.